we have a couple of things just as far as more housekeeping things. There were some things that were distributed. Commissioner Berger distributed some things to us today.
There are some items that we will be considering at some point, and I've distributed the language that comes from the New York City Charter and their rules and regs on qualified campaign expenditures, what public funds may be used for, how to handle small primaries, primaries where there are fewer than 1,000 voters, and how to handle non-competitive primaries. These are all from the law, the chart of the law or the regs, and they're available to anybody who wants to look at them online at the City Campaign Finance Board, and they are instructive for what we will be considering somewhere down the line. So as we're handing stuff out, I didn't want anybody to think we're handing out secret materials. These are all publicly available materials.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Berger. So we're going to get started now with testimony. The first person I have on my list is Jamila Jamil, or Gamila Jamil. Good morning.
Good morning.
Could you just make sure the mic is working? That we can all.
It's working.
Perfect.
I'll use my mama voice. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jamila Jamil. I am the Upstate Director Advocacy of the New York Immigration Coalition. It's an umbrella policy and advocacy organization that works statewide. Over 200 immigrant servicing member organizations are on our coalition. So I want to thank you on behalf of our organization and our members for the opportunity to testify on the need for a strong, small dollar public financing system. And I want to thank Commissioner Berger for those papers that you just handed out, because those are the things that we have reviewed. And so while New York has many barriers at the ballot box, Phil lifted the passage of the impressive voting reform package earlier this year. In order to strengthen our democracy, we need to go even further. We have changed how we vote in elections, and how we need to change now through those elections how we fund them. Small dollar public financing systems for primary and general elections have proven to increase the gender and racial and ethnic diversity of both viable candidates and election winners. In addition to a more diverse pool of campaign contributions, a smaller dollar matching system also allows for a more diverse group of candidates. Candidates who may not have deep personal financial resources or who do not come from wealthy communities are more easily able to run competitive campaigns funded by the very people they seek to represent. This is the democracy we are advocating for today, and where legislator reflects the people they serve, and where elected officials are responsive to the broader electorate rather than a small percentage of wealthy campaign contributions. In adopting the vision of a 21st century democracy, the New York Immigration Coalition offers the following recommendations. Number one, to create an independent campaign financing board. An independent board with fixed budget and needed to ensure the integrity of any public financing program and maintain effective enforcement of the rules this commission adopts. Number two, to lower qualifying threshold candidates must meet to receive funds. Candidates voluntarily choose to participate in a public matching program, so the program must be an attractive option. In order to receive public funds, candidates prove community support by reaching thresholds for both the number of contributions as well as money raised. These must be set low enough to ensure candidates can reach them. Number three, establish lower contribution limits. Campaign contribution limits must be lowered from the current levels. New York has the country's highest contribution limits among 38 states that limit individual contributions. If contribution limits remain this high, fewer candidates will want to voluntarily opt into a system when they can raise enormous contributions outside this program. New York State can truly be a
Thank you so much for your testimony, and I appreciate you respecting the time limit. There's one thing I didn't do. I didn't have each of the commissioners introduce themselves and who appointed them. And after that, we'll have the mayor of the city of Buffalo come up and speak. My name is Crystal Rodriguez. I was appointed by the Assembly Speaker, Carl Hastie.
appointed by Senate Minority Leader John Flanagan.
Jay Jacobs, appointed by Governor Andrew Cuomo.
Henry Berger, jointly appointed by the Governor, the Speaker, and the Majority Leader of the Senate.
I'm Denora Gatacho, appointed by Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins. There's my mom voice. Thank you. Oh, sure.
Mylan Dinnerstein, appointed by Governor Andrew Cuomo.
And we have joining us by video conference Rosanna Vargas, who was also appointed by the Assembly Speaker. Now we're joined by Buffalo Mayor Byron Brown.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, commissioners. Good morning, Chair Rodriguez. I want to just say I think that the work that you are doing as commissioners is very important to the democratic process here in New York State, and ultimately, I think, important to our democracy overall. My name, of course, is Byron Brown. I'm the mayor of Buffalo, New York. I'm here because I'd like to offer some thoughts on why I believe publicly financed campaigns are important and ought to be implemented in New York State. New York is on the brink of a transformative moment in our democracy. The work of the Public Campaign Financing Commission gives us an opportunity to make a big impact here in Buffalo and across the state by creating a robust public campaign financing program. Publicly financed elections with a lower cap on individual donations will help restore voters' confidence in the officials elected to represent the will of their communities. When voters have more confidence in the system, they are more likely to participate in elections and be civically engaged. Elected leaders are also more likely to spend more time resolving constituent concerns and engage in policymaking because the pressure to raise money from their campaigns will be significantly less. This new system will therefore improve the level of our civic discourse and help remove barriers to participation. As the former chair of the state's 2015 Wage Board, I appreciate the burden a special commission has in helping address a large and complex problem. Working to secure much-needed increases in the wages of fast food workers, which help hundreds of thousands of workers and their communities, required perseverance and hard work. The broad scope of the challenge involved in rethinking our elections must not become a barrier to action. New York's history as a progressive leader whose elected officials have long championed the rights of minorities, women, children, workers, and LGBTQ individuals should serve as a reminder of our capacity to take bold steps when it comes to expanding the number of voices that shape our democracy. Publicly financed campaigns will help level the playing field by ensuring that the will of the voters is what drives the political process. This will also help attract candidates from more diverse backgrounds, because people will feel more empowered to participate in the political process. They will likely see the value of running for office themselves. By implementing a matching system, along with lowering the contributions for all candidates, the Commission will strike the proper balance between private contributions and public financing that will make a public financing system sustainable. The experiences in other places where publicly financed campaigns have been enacted demonstrate that they can work well and encourage a wider array of candidates to run for office. That is why I believe it is time for New York to embrace publicly financed campaigns and cap the level of donations. I encourage all of my colleagues in government to support the Commission's goal of crafting a proposal to introduce publicly financed elections that will make New York's government stronger and more representative. Again, I want to thank all of you for the time that you have provided in traveling to Buffalo to hear the concerns of our community and for affording me the opportunity to share my thoughts on the Commission's work and a public campaign financing system. I look forward to seeing your recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Brown. Next on our list, we have Luisa Pacheco.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. I want to thank this commission for your labor. I know you've been traveling up and down the state, and it is laborious, so thank you for that. Also want to thank Chairwoman Crystal Rodriguez for welcoming us all here today. My name is Luisa Fletcher Pacheco. I'm a citizen and voter in the 141st Assembly District and the 60th Senate District. I'm a strong believer in citizen engagement in politics. In fact, I've been an organizer for the better part of 2 decades. I know I look young, but it's been a good run. My job, as I see it, is civic engagement on the most fundamental levels of human representation. I build community, and I engage that community with lawmakers on bills that will impact their lives and their livelihood. Oh, and I do volunteer in elections. I do a lot of that work. I'm a rigorous believer in our right to be heard and our voices being cast at the ballot box. I generally vote on the Working Families Party line, but what I have to say is supported, I think, by citizens and activists of all stripes. Right now, this commission is essentially a lawmaking body. Some people argue that the legislature was wrong to give you this power, but no one disputes that you have it. When I engage my local community to go to Albany and register their voice there with lawmakers, there's usually a group of us who go in together. We make our case to the senator or assembly member. They listen. They ask questions. Sometimes they tell us that they support us and why they do so. Other times, they oppose us. They tell us why. We thank the ones who are with us. We push back respectfully to those who don't. And we, talk to our opponents, and we bring up other arguments to persuade them that our argument is stronger than the one they give us credit for. It's sometimes very satisfying, and sometimes it's very disappointing. But that is democracy. This commission is a whole different ballgame. You're writing legislation, but you don't have staff or offices that we can actually call and talk to make an appointment. This hearing is our chance. You have heard from many people and witnesses at the first 3 hearings, and we'll hear today that fusion voting is popular and important to many voters. 10% of all voters in the last gubernatorial voted on a fusion party line, so that's 600,000 of our fellow citizens. You must be aware that the Court of Appeals has ruled in favor of fusion voting 3 times. Do you think that the commission must abide by the law in making its recommendations? I presume you must, because as a commissioner, you were supposed to sign the oath of office to serve on this body that all commissioners take. It's the same oath that all legislators take. It's an oath to uphold the Constitution of New York State. So that brings us to the obvious question. Do you feel that the commission is allowed to ignore the Constitution? If so, why?
Thank you, Ms. Pacheco. Next on the list, we have Juwanza Williams.
Okay, thank you so much, Commission, for having us again. Before I read my remarks, I just wanted to say that I was deeply disturbed by today's New York Times piece written by Vivian Wang, detailing the true ambitions of Mr. Jay Jacobs here, and we absolutely say no to that. So, this is a call for democracy. My name is Juwanza James Williams, and I'm the Director of Organizing at Vocal New York, a statewide organization with representation in Western New York that is and committed to ending AIDS, mass incarceration, homelessness, and the drug war. And I'm also a leader in the movement for campaign finance reform in New York State because it has been demonstrated year after year that we cannot depend on elected officials in Albany to do the work to address the crises my organization was founded to address over 20 years ago. Because the overwhelming influence of industry compromising their leadership and devastating vulnerable communities. We are counting on our elected leaders and the commission that they have appointed to deliver a strong public financing program by the end of the year. And that means a 6-to-1 match on small donations for both primary and general elections across the state, lower contribution limits, and an independent enforcement unit. The power that campaign contributions from industry has in Albany is not a myth, it is not an exaggeration. It is a shocking reality, and it is absolutely antithetical to any democratic experiment. Elected officials across political lines are often beholden to corporate contributions to acquire and maintain power. This has a muting effect that silences the interests and experiences of low-income, working, and precariously middle-income communities, both in cities and in rural areas across this state. So we as a people ought to be always creating systems of accountability and expanding the democratic process so that all of those subject to the state are allowed the space and ability to articulate their interests. Fusion voting, therefore, is critical for New York, and the Working Families Party has been integral to the advances of working people in New York and across this country. I call on this commission to leave fusion voting untouched. We are expanding our democracy, not trading it at the expense of New Yorkers. And since I have 39 seconds left, I will continue to say that what has been happening this past few weeks with this commission and what the charges actually are has expanded wildly beyond what the initial goals were. What we understood as a people in this state was that this commission's job was to help make recommendations about what it looked like for publicly financed campaigns in New York State, not to discuss how we're going to change fusion or anything about fusion. The introduction of fusion into this conversation is incredibly indicative of the reason, part and parcel, as to why we need publicly financed campaigns in the first place, because established Democrats oftentimes are not listening to the people.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Just a reminder, although I said it in the beginning, if you know that you've testified at a previous hearing, I'm going to ask that when your name is called that you actually pass up, because remember what I said, we need to give everyone a chance. There are people who didn't attend other hearings across the state, and they should be heard. So next I'm going to call to the mic Assemblyman Mike Morris from the New York State Assembly.
Good morning. I would like to thank all of you for the work that you're doing. Though we may disagree with some of the points in here, I do want to mention that for the record. I'm Mike Norris, and I currently serve as the Assembly member for the 144th District, which is from Western New York, and as the ranking member, minority member of the Assembly Election Law Committee. First and foremost, I believe the venue for deciding the laws of public campaign financing and rules governing eligibility, political party qualifications, and multiple party nominations and designations should not be delegated and vested with you. Amendments to the election law and other statutes fall within the purview and the debate of both the governor and the New York State Legislature. Of the 150 elected assembly members and 63 elected senators, not an appointed board. This year alone, there has been substantial and extensive amendments like early voting and consolidation of primaries made to the election law. They were examined and debated in the Election Law Committee and on the floor by elected officials. Having just enacted these new laws through the proper legislative process, then why was this commission formed by Albany leadership behind closed doors, stuffed into the big ugly budget bill with little time for review, and voted on in the middle of the night? This is a significant reason why I voted against it as a member of the Assembly, coupled with my grave concerns that the delegation of this statutory authority to this commission is constitutionally flawed. The state legislature and the governor are elected to amend statutes, not appointed commissions. Now, with regards to your current deliberations, I have two major concerns: cost and the constitutional right to political association. First, the state is $64 billion in debt, only second to the state of California, and is expected to face another budget deficit this year. Our resources are more limited, with over 1 million people leaving our state since 2010, and our needs are great, particularly here in Western New York, where our roads and bridges are crumbling, and our educational systems and libraries need more resources in our evolving world. I am very confident that my constituents would rather see $100 million a year, which will end up being billions in time, go to addressing infrastructure and education priorities, rather than being spent on annoying robocalls, Facebook ads, lawn signs, and campaign mail. Precious public tax dollars should be spent on critical public infrastructure projects and educational priorities, and not wasted on political advertising. Secondly, I strongly caution this commission to recognize a citizen's constitutional right to political association and one's ability to form, participate, promote, and support candidates of their choosing within a political party. Fusion voting is a key part of this. Any major infringements on a person's ability to associate in political parties of their choice will have an adverse and chilling effect on our electoral process and democracy by limiting political expression and voter choice. Again, I thank you for the opportunity to address you today.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Next, we have David Chuddy.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I am David Chuddy. I'm a retired union member from the Public Employees Federation, and thanks for this opportunity. There seems to be a lot of noise in the press and in these hearings about fusion voting. I am a big supporter of fusion voting, which is my right. Fusion voting enhances democracy. There's been some that have tried to make an argument it limits it. It enhances democracy. It's fine with me if some members of the commission may not be favorable to fusion. But if you want to ban it, you have to do it the right way, the democratic way. And that means you have to get the actual state legislature, not the commission, to pass a constitutional amendment in 2 separate sessions of the legislature, and then it'll go before the voters for a referendum. That's the right and proper way to go about it. Maybe it'll pass. I hope not. But that's the process that legislators are required to follow. And it stands to reason that you need to abide by that process because you are, in fact, quasi-legislators. But again, today's New York Times article, which a few folks have alluded to already, has a story that the commission is heading down a different path. It says you won't ban fusion outright, but that you'll try to kill it indirectly. That's disgraceful if that's true. Right now, the minor parties have to get at least 50,000 votes to qualify as a ballot status party. The New York Times says you want to raise that to 250,000 votes. That's a huge raise. And my hunch is that you've realized you can't ban fusion outright given the Constitution of our state, so you're going to try to figure out an end run around the Constitution? Don't you think that's wrong? The front door is closed, so you're going to try to sneak through the back door. It sounds like trickery. It's dishonest, it's undemocratic, and I'd like to believe that it's beneath you as a commission. If you want to increase the threshold based on an increase in voter participation over the years, then, and that'd be similar to indexing, say, a cost of living raise in a union contract, go ahead. The math isn't difficult. It would raise the vote threshold to maybe 60 or 70,000 votes. But to come up with a number you think we won't be able to meet so as to put us out of business, well, I'd like to know exactly what school of democracy you belong to. So I'll add a question to the one Louisa asked earlier. We know the major parties don't love minor parties. But do you think it's right to get rid of them through quintupling the vote threshold, that does not strike me as fair. Does that strike you as fair? I hope not. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chuddy. Next up, we have Sarah Buckley.
Sarah Buckley, Working Families Party State Committee member. Thank you, commissioners, for all your work on this topic. Out in the country where I live and at the hospital where I work, most folks still, even in this slightly more politically engaged moment, do not feel connected to politics or elections. I can imagine that most of us in this room do feel connected to politics and elections. In fact, I assume most of us in this room recognize that our ability to survive and thrive depends on regular people's, country people, healthcare workers' ability to also feel connected to politics and elections. I spend a significant amount of my time trying to convince people of their connection to politics and elections. So I'm asking this commission to help me convince regular people their lives are connected to, in fact, depend on politics and elections. Please take fusion voting entirely off your plate. It's constitutionally protected, it's not a part of public financing, and some of the quirks of the system that might need tweaking can be dealt with by the legislature. But most of all, having alternatives that bring more people in and allow them to vote for a candidate that has a chance of winning is vital for our survival right now. When a landman came to my door years ago and demanded the mineral rights to our land or he'd take them by eminent domain, the Working Families Party stuck their necks out first in solidarity with me and my neighbors against fracking. Years before it was a part of public discussions in Western New York, the WFP was asking questions of candidates about racism in the criminal justice system, when a standard answer to that question at the time was something like, racism in our criminal justice system? Which now, thankfully, is hardly a possible answer. The WFP has stood by unwaveringly for limiting the number of patients nurses and aides can take care of at one time. The Working Families Party is a political home for myself and so many others that brings people otherwise too disgusted with things as they are to vote for a mainstream candidate because they know they can make a difference. And I know most people in this room want a more vibrant democracy. And we know that banning fusion voting outright or setting the bar so high to qualify that no minor party could ever reach it will not get us to a more vibrant democracy. What will is a public financing system that has a 6-to-1 statewide match and an 8-to-1 in-district match, one that has independent enforcement unit and lowers maximum contributions for all donations. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Ms. Buckley. I'd like to invite the New York State Republican Committee Chair, Nick Langworthy.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I appreciate the opportunity to put my comments on record today. However, I am certain that neither my comments nor those from everyday citizens of this state, the taxpayers, will seriously be considered because it's evident that the work of this commission is a fait accompli. To fully grasp the magnitude of the self-serving and political interests of the creation of this commission driven solely by Andrew Cuomo, one must look to how it was started in the first place. It defies credulity to suggest that Andrew Cuomo, who's amassed a $100 million war chest, more than any governor in the country, from those who have business before the state, suddenly cared about eliminating money from politics. In an attempt to appease the far left, Cuomo came out for a taxpayer-funded election program and struck a deal to create this commission, governing its rules with a dual-track purpose. Number one, to severely hamstring potential political opponents by restricting the amount of money that they can raise and spend. And two, to exact retribution on the Working Families Party, who had the audacity to support Cynthia Nixon for governor of the state of New York. From its inception, this commission served no purpose other than to do the dishonest bidding of Governor Cuomo. The bill that established the commission was even corrupted when he worked to quietly overturn provisions so that his hand-picked Democrat Party boss, Jay Jacobs, could lead the commission. Jay Jacobs is a gentleman, but Cuomo's hired gun has no business dictating how $100 million in taxpayer-funded dollars are being spent or how our democratic process is conducted in the future. As I said from the outset, this is Cuomo's attempt to legally rig elections, and he put the fox in charge of the henhouse. We also learned that the rules of this commission will be made public on Thanksgiving Eve. Just as they did for Jacobs' appointment before the 4th of July, they'll do a news dump when no one is paying attention and leave very little time for public review and changes before this report automatically becomes law. As is often the case with Cuomo, he corrupts the so-called anti-corruption tool. The truth is, taxpayer-funded elections will not eliminate corruption. Case in point, the New York City system. Instead of tamping down corruption, it's become an asset for the corrupt. Another tool in the toolbox. We've seen a host of people fined and in jail for scheming and abusing the system. New Yorkers already pay the highest taxes in the United States of America. Many of them, from Buffalo to Eastern Long Island, are struggling to make ends meet. More than 1 million have packed up and left under Andrew Cuomo's tenure as governor of the state. The last thing our state government should be spending money on is $100 million on politicians, television ads, consultants, robocalls, and bumper stickers. Tax-paying New Yorkers don't want this, but in today's state government, their wishes will be met with a tin ear. I urge New Yorkers from all political stripes to join me in rejecting this sham commission and this welfare for politicians program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next, I'm going to invite Robert Dando.
My name is Robert Dando. I'm a retired SEIU member. I'm also a regional vice chair for Chautauqua, Cattaraugus, and Allegheny counties for the Working Families Party. And I'm also running as a local candidate in my community. And I was asked by the Democratic Party to run on their ticket as well. So I feel that one of the problems we face is that we've got to get more people involved, and I think public financing of elections will help that. In my county, half of the county legislatures are running unopposed, and dozens of offices on the local level are also that way. I feel cost is a big factor. I know how much it costs just to run a simple election in a town. I think that public financing will help get more people out and able to serve the community. I think too many of our people are unable to finance an election. And I think public financing will help. The other thing is on the higher level is that getting candidates out to see their constituents. I know that I've gone door to door to 1,000-some doors. And they welcome seeing a candidate. I don't know how many, especially in the rural areas, have said they've never seen a candidate in their life. I think that we've got to yet encourage people to get out there and vote. Now, as I said, I'm a member of the Working Families Party. I feel that fusion voting is something that is beneficial to the democracy of this state. So many issues have been raised by minor parties over the years, and this is going back to the progressive years of the early 1900s. So many of those issues that they have raised have found their way into major party platforms and through their efforts have been passed and become law to help the people of the state. And this is why I feel fusion voting has a great help and way to bring out to people and make them feel more involved. I have still runs of people who are still registered as liberals, even though the party hasn't existed in 20, 30 years. But these people feel that, they're a part of something, and when they can vote for issues that they feel strongly about, they can feel more involved, and I think it encourages these people to get out because they can vote on these other parties. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dando. I'd like to call to the stage the chair of the Erie County Democratic Committee, Mr. Jeremy Zoner.
Good morning. Thank you, Commissioners, for being here. I just want to get right to it. Let me put it simply. I believe fusion voting is bad for voters, bad for democracy, bad for our wallets, and should be banned in New York State as it is in 41 other states. Full disclosure, I dislike fusion voting as viewed from two perspectives. If you read the Buffalo News, I have dual roles, an elections commissioner and party chair. And there's a third, a New Yorker who is tired of cluttered and confusing ballots. As commissioner, I have to pay and print for those ballots and those complicated cross endorsements. And I and my fellow commissioners are always facing real and threatened lawsuits over ballot access, and we're not alone. Half of all litigation in the United States of America takes place right here in New York. Let me repeat that. Half of all ballot litigation in the United States takes place right here in New York, and fusion voting is at the heart of so much of it. When I'm wearing a chairman's hat, I deal with the intrigue that inevitably results from such a system on the other end, the constant vying of candidates for the real or imagined advantage of landing a minor party endorsement. And yes, I've certainly cross-endorsed and had candidates who have been cross-endorsed and benefited from it. And as long as that's the game, we will be forced to play it to some degree. But if you're worried about patronage deals and deals, this is where a lot of it comes from. And I truly believe that it takes away the choice of voters because it forces them to vote for cross-endorsed candidates. We recently had a Green Party person try to run on for Congress to siphon votes away from a congressional race in 2018. It's pure cynicism, and it's what fusion voting has become. And when major parties play these games and block the true believers from activists from taking their place on the ballot and fighting for the things they believe in, parties and candidates should rise and fall on their own merits. Newsday had a great editorial back in July. They said, in a system this convoluted and open to manipulation, the members who believe their parties stand for a governing philosophy are the clear losers. Banning fusion voting is one way to give the process back to the people, and I completely agree with that. And New York State political parties should compete honestly in the marketplace of ideas. And New York State candidates should seek the line that best represents what they believe, not the line that merely gives them the best chance of winning. And New York State voters shouldn't have to play a political version of Where's Waldo when looking at a ballot. And New York State, where we have undertaken dramatic election law reform in 2019, we should enact one more, the end of fusion voting. And I will say, there's been some people asking you questions, but what I would ask is, look, the bills that I have looked at about fusion voting have not eliminated minor parties. They have prohibited them from accruing votes on several different lines. So my question to those that are here from the minor parties, what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of running your own candidates, being your own party, handling your own organization, handling your own candidate recruitment, and getting people out there to run on your line? Most of these minor parties don't even have a process for endorsement. Not most of them. The Working Families has a great process. They have beliefs. They have a platform. They go through this. They have a petition process. The Green
I have
Party
to interrupt,
does
Mr.
not.
Zellner. We've reached a 3-minute limit.
I just have one question for the chairman, if I could. I just wanted to correct the record. You said you pay for the ballots? I think they pay for the ballots.
The Green Party of the state of New York does not participate in fusion voting, and they run their own candidates and have their own beliefs.
Thank you,
and that's
Mr.
the way it ought to
Zellner.
be.
Thank you. Next up, I'm inviting to the stage Roger Cook. Roger Cook.
Good morning. I'm Roger Cook and a founding member of the Working Families Party. I've been a member since 1998. The Working Families Party has supported public financing of elections for a number of years, and we support any efforts by this commission to move New York State in this direction. However, as today's New York Times article makes clear, this commission is also intent on cutting the Working Families Party out of fusion voting. This is not right. It's an assault on our democracy. Like all members of the Working Families Party, I belong to a number of progressive organizations, everything from Citizen Action to the United Church of Christ to the Grand Island Economic Development Advisory Board. As members of these organizations, we've run a lot of reform campaigns, but all too often our campaigns were opposed by powerful interests, such as the fossil fuel industry, which has undue influence, even, yes, in the Democratic Party. It was for this reason that we formed the Working Families Party, to give progressives a seat at the table, to engage our members in the democratic process by endorsing candidates who embraced our issues and helping to win their elections. We've been able to gain influence in getting progressive policies in legislation passed. Let me give you an example. The climate crisis is a major issue for environmentalists and for the Working Families Party. Over 10 years ago, we began asking local candidates seeking our endorsement if they would advocate for the installation of solar panels on their municipal buildings. Most said they were open to the idea, and most followed up. So today, that more often than not, these towns have rooftop solar or solar farms in their towns. My own town of Grand Island is a case in point. Nathan McMurray, running for supervisor on the Democratic Party line, requested the WFP endorsement. We gave it to him with the understanding that he would address issues such as solar energy in the town. The incumbent conservative supervisor was very highly popular, and we had no notion that Nathan would win his election. Yet, McMurray won his race by a couple of votes. The Working Families line made the difference. He got 330 votes on our line. That's 8% of the votes, and he carried through in his promise. Today, we have 2 solar farms with 3 more in the works. Grand Island has the potential to achieve net zero energy consumption through its solar program within a few years. And at the state level, I'm proud to say that the Working Families Party was the major proponent of a renewable energy program by spearheading the campaign for the Climate and Community Protection Act. As a result of the intense debate and negotiations that went on between our party and the Democratic Party, we now have the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which will ensure that our state will meet the goals of a clean energy economy. It is so vital that we get these policies passed to overcome the challenge that the climate crisis presents to us. So I, again, urge this commission to re-examine
Thank you
its
so
position.
much.
Okay.
Appreciate your testimony. Assemblyman Angelo Morinello.
Thank you. Another minute and it would be good afternoon to all. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. I'm Assemblymember Angelo Morinello, representing the 145th Assembly District. I'm also an attorney and a retired judge. Although the 2019-20 state budget included legislation establishing a commission to examine, evaluate, and make recommendations for new laws with respect to how the state should implement a system of voluntary campaign financing for statewide and state legislative public offices, as well as the program parameters. I voted no on this measure for various legal and practical reasons. In the past 10 years, over 1 million people have left New York due to high taxes. There has now been a threat by J.P. Morgan to leave the state for that same reason. They have been one of the financial movers in New York State and one of the largest tax contributors in addition to their employees. We stand to lose this because of taxation. Add another $400 million. That's 8 zeros over the next 4 years. Cycle. This $400 million is taxpayer dollars that should go for infrastructure and will certainly result in a burden on taxpayers. There are ways to reduce contributions, not only on LLCs, but we should have reduced them on all corporations, all public unions, the teachers' union, and we should eliminate the ability for them to create different entities to contribute. If we lower the threshold, that would alleviate some of those financial questions, but it doesn't seem to be focused on. I have proposed legislation for 3 years to lower the threshold, and it has gained zero traction. I agree with the Commission's assessment. There is no appetite in Albany to reduce campaign contributions, and I think reducing them would be doing a greater service to the taxpayer than increasing tax burden. Elections are about personal choice, yet a system of publicly financed campaigns will in effect use individual taxpayers' monies to support candidates who do not share their views. This takes personal choice out of election. Taxpayers would be paying for many campaign tools to support opposing views. However, just as important, and actually more important, is the constitutionality question of delegating of an authority to an unelected body. The statute, which is buried in a budget bill, violates the guarantee clause of the U.S. Constitution by granting an unelected commission the power to supersede statutes enacted by the legislature.
Assemblyman, if you could finish that sentence, your 3 minutes is up.
Okay. Do I get two more
Can you
seconds?
just finish that sentence?
Thank you. Any financing scheme needs to be addressed through the normal legislative process and not the newly created Public Campaign Financing Commission. I had more, but I will honor the 3 minute, and I do respect and appreciate all you have done and the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Assemblyman. Thank you. Next up, we have Mary, is it Hamill? Hamley. Thank you. Thank you, Mary.
Welcome and thank you, Chair Rodriguez, distinguished commissioners, and fellow New Yorkers. My name's Mary Hamley, and I am a member of Citizen Action, Rock Acts, and the Police Accountability Board Alliance in Rochester, New York. Democracy should not be for sale. Wall Street billionaires and corporate donors flood our elections with special interest money, while the voices and needs of everyday New Yorkers go unheard and unfulfilled. Politicians often invoke the intentions of the Founding Fathers, as if over 200 years ago they had any vision of the value of a diverse voting citizenry. I'm tired of the desires of wealthy landowning white men who established a de jure oligarchy to protect their own interests and eliminate the interests of people of color, women, and lower class residents. We know that story of the long road to full citizenship and suffrage, and yet we still live with that policy de facto in a system where elected officials' values are bought by their biggest contributors, where those big money interests are rewarded with corporate welfare in the form of tax breaks and subsidiaries, lax regulation, and pet projects, such as gentrification of communities of color. This engenders a sense of hopelessness and disenfranchisement. New York State voter participation is pitiful. Why bother if your voice is lost and you do not have community representation in the perpetual scramble for more and greater funding? The typical New Yorker cannot afford to launch a campaign where competitors and incumbents already have access to the cycle of rich donors made richer through politician-backed quid pro quos. This is not what democracy should look like. Only by winning a true democracy can we address the most urgent issues of our time: the lack of affordable, quality housing, crumbling infrastructure, underfunded public schools, the school-to-prison pipeline, lack of living wage jobs, spiraling student debt, environmental degradation, mass incarceration, unjust policing, and unaffordable health care. That's a long list. We need to enact a system of small donor public campaign financing and increase the political power of working people in New York State and access to elected office. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to invite Assemblyman Andy Goodell up, but next up to bat, so to speak, is going to be Rex Stewart.
Good afternoon. I'm Assemblyman Andy Goodell. I represent Chautauqua County, which is the 150th district, the furthest, I might add, from Albany. In fact, my district is closer to 9 other capitals than Albany. But having made that observation, I also have a very different observation about public financing of campaigns. It's my belief that our campaign system should be as fair and equitable and open to both challengers and incumbents. The problem with a matching public campaign system is that it gives a huge advantage to incumbents. The reason for that is incumbents start the race with cash in the bank and a well-developed list of campaign contributors, which means that they meet the threshold way before their challenger even gets off the ground. Take an incumbent's natural fundraising advantage and multiply it by 6 or 8 or 20. And you take that natural fundraising advantage and you explode it, virtually eliminating the ability of a challenger to run an effective campaign against an incumbent. Now, I say this as an incumbent. When I first ran, I was outspent about 5-1. I still won. So I understand it's not just about money. But I will also assure you that money helps to get your message out. So if you develop a system that allows a politician to raise funds in the off-season and start out the year already to match those contributions with state money, with taxpayer money, you give a huge advantage. I would also point out that a public matching program also is an invitation to fraud. And the higher the match, the higher a fraud. If you have a 20-to-1 match, I can tell you, you bring me $100, the moment you walk in, I'll give you a check for $200, you just made $100, and I clear $1,900 on a 20-to-1 match. Think about that. I appreciate your efforts, but please, don't develop a system that guarantees incumbent re-election at the expense of any challenger. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Rex Stewart. And then up next is Samra, is it Brock? Brooke? You'd be next.
My name is Rex Stewart. I'm a Presbyterian pastor,
And I am one of the plaintiffs from Niagara County in the lawsuit against this commission and the governor, because I think it is unconstitutional and awful that this commission has been given the power to do away with fusion voting, a long-established New York State constitutional right, held up in court cases going back over 100 years. I'm a registered Democrat who usually votes for the Democratic candidate, but I often do so on the Working Families Party line. I do this to send a signal to my party that it should continue to advocate for many of the progressive policies and legislation that the Working Families Party promotes. I believe having viable minor political parties on the ballot can nudge the major parties toward one direction or another. Fusion voting allows voters such as me to push my party toward the progressive policies I believe in. But I'm a realist, and I almost never vote for a minor party candidate who is not also a candidate on a major party line. And so I appreciate fusion voting as a right that I enjoy and use. Now, if you or anyone else wants to limit or eliminate fusion voting, it must be done through a constitutionally appropriate mechanism to change the Constitution, not via an appointed committee. The legislature, and only the legislature, can initiate such a proposed constitutional amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Samra? After Samra, we'll have Laura Friedenbach. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you, Commission, for hearing us. My name is Samra Brook. I'm a member of Citizen Action and a 2020 candidate for State Senate in the 55th District. I'm here today because I believe in New York and our ability to be a true leader for positive political change in this country. For too long, our democracy has been influenced by special interests and a few wealthy donors who do not represent the needs and values of the majority of New Yorkers, including especially women, people of color, the working and middle classes, and any and all underrepresented New Yorkers. We need to systematically remove the barriers to political participation. This means putting an end to the role that big money plays in state politics and returning political power to New Yorkers of all genders, races, and socioeconomic statuses. Presently in New York State, a person with access to a few wealthy donors can become an elected official more easily than someone who has proven their commitment to representing their constituents fairly. If we want the best leaders for our great state, we need to create policies that allow for the most qualified, innovative, and committed New Yorkers to run for office. Today, we can do two things to help make that a reality: lower contribution limits for all candidates and implement a small donor matching program. As a state Senate candidate representing fewer than 300,000 people, I can technically receive up to $19,300 per individual donor in an election cycle. Meanwhile, that same donor can only give $5,600 to their preferred presidential candidate, seeking to represent 327 million Americans. The current contribution limits do one thing, and that's to make sure that candidates like me, a woman of color from an immigrant middle-class family, don't get the same chance at success as those from wealthier backgrounds or with access to billionaire donors who can max out at nearly $20,000 a cycle. The second thing we need to do is implement a small donor matching program. According to a Brennan Center for Justice report, in the 2018 New York State election, just 100 big money donors gave more to candidates than all 137,000 small donors combined. What's more alarming is that those big donors underrepresented the geographical, socioeconomic, and racial diversity of the state. Meanwhile, small donors on average better reflected the socioeconomic and racial diversity of the state as a whole. By removing these barriers to our political process, we create more pathways for diverse candidates to become elected officials and address the issues most pressing to us all. Let's show the rest of the country that New York values democracy, and we will continue to uphold our shared democratic values by passing meaningful and effective campaign finance reform. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Samra. Laura Friedenbach is next, and after her, Nicholas Nyhart. If you can come forward.
Hi, I'm Laura Friedenbach, the Deputy Campaign Manager for Fair Elections for New York, a campaign of over 200 groups, many of them represented here today, calling for the creation of a strong public financing program in New York State. Campaign supporters sent a letter to the commission yesterday. I have copies. I will distribute them to you. And I plan to use my 3 minutes to selectively read and summarize that letter for you today. So the letter is as follows. Dear Commissioners, this commission was envisioned by Governor Cuomo to establish the best public financing system in the United States, something New Yorkers would be proud of and that would inspire other states. Unfortunately, we are concerned the commission is headed in the wrong direction and is developing a weak public financing program focused more on protecting incumbents than amplifying the voices of donors, small donors, and reducing the corrupting influence of big money in our democracy. It is not too late to reverse course and create a strong public financing program based on proven programs like New York City's and legislation previously introduced by the governor and by the legislature. Based on years of research and analysis, the Fair Elections campaign has identified and long called for certain core components of a strong public financing program, which are outlined in the letter, and I don't have time to reiterate here. The commission is falling well short of these basic expectations, including the commission has voted to restrict matching funds to in-district donations. Fair Elections for New York supports matching all small donations from New Yorkers across the state. The commission proposed qualifying thresholds that are too high and limit candidate participation. The commission's contribution limits are too high, higher than what you could even contribute to a presidential candidate. The commission appears receptive to State Board of Elections administration and enforcement instead of independent enforcement. And the commission's focus on fusion voting is a distraction from the main purpose of establishing a strong public financing program for New York State. You'll find more on all of these points within the letter, which I will distribute. As commissioners have stated throughout this process, it is not too late to change course and rethink some of the preliminary decisions that were made. We urge you to do that and issue an interim report in bill draft form before the final report, which you've indicated will come on November 27th. We look forward to working with you to design a model program that empowers small donors and limits the corrupting influence of big money in our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Nicholas Neihart. After Nicholas, Thomas Rowley. Have I said that right? Rowley. Thank you, Mr. Rowley.
Good morning, Commissioners, and thank you very much for your public service in being on this commission and going around the state for these hearings. I'm Nick Neihart, and for 3 decades I've worked with policymakers and other stakeholders to reduce the role of big money in politics by enacting small dollar donor systems of publicly financed elections. As the head of the Every Voice Center, I help reformers design, win, and implement numerous models of publicly financed elections. I'd like to focus on just one critical point. Small donor public financing systems have to be attractive to people who run for office. If people who seek office believe they will be at a disadvantage running under public financing, they're less likely to participate in the program, and the fewer candidates that participate, the less impact the program will have. I know you've heard testimony about successful systems in other venues, but I'd like to briefly call your attention to an important small donor system that has now failed, our country's system of presidential public financing. While it once flourished, the leading presidential candidates now don't use it, and the major reason is that it doesn't provide the funds they need to compete well against a leading privately financed opponent, especially in a political environment with huge amounts of independent expenditures. Design details make a difference. In my experience, when lawmakers and potential candidates consider these systems, the first question they ask is, how will it work for me? If the systems provide too little campaign money, are too restrictive, or require unattainable numbers of small donations, the candidates just won't opt in. I'd worry that from a practical perspective, that limiting matching funds to in-district contributions only would sharply reduce the number of office seekers who would participate in the system. Candidates running with public funds would be facing privately funded opponents who are subject to no such restrictions, plus the prospect of unlimited independent expenditures from outside the district. Successful programs in New York City, Connecticut, Montgomery County, and Seattle all permit a role for outside the district contributions in generating public funds, so I strongly urge you to reconsider your recent decision. I'd also suggest 3 other provisions: keeping the ratio of matching funds to 6-to-1 or higher, significantly reducing the extremely high existing contribution limits for all candidates, and lowering qualifying thresholds so that they are comparable to those that have worked in other venues. These policy details are likely to increase candidate engagement in the system and help campaign financing in New York State elections live up to the small d democratic ideals of equality and participation. If successful, the small donor matching fund program you design will be the single most important campaign finance policy in the nation. I wish you every success in your hard work and deliberations going forward. And one last point, I lived in Connecticut for 30 years. We had both fusion voting and public financing existing side by side, and in my judgment as a voter and a citizen, they gave voters more choices and more power, gave those voters more power within the political process. So thank you.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Rowley, and after that I'd like to invite Ralph Lorigo, the chair of the Conservative Party.
Well, my name is Tom Rowland with the Working Families Party, the Western New York chapter. We've been fighting for public financing elections since the inception of the Working Families Party. We believe that it is a fair system to help candidates run, especially on minor party lines like ours. We know that New York City system has worked very well over the years, a few hiccups that they've been working through, but even more so, the Connecticut program. We were in the fair elections hearing in Albany, and the gentleman who actually runs the Connecticut program was there and explained how their system works. It is a very great system. They do a great job of actually coaching candidates how to run in this system. It's an independent board. They do a great job at it. He said they've only ever really had to prosecute one person ever since the system has been implemented there, so they did a great job at it, working the candidates through the system, helping them out. So the Connecticut system is more of a model that you guys should look at as far as implementing it in New York State. So please consider the fair elections is the most important thing. The troubling part is what we've heard today about the tried elimination of the minor parties in New York State through the fusion voting ban, the higher thresholds for 250,000. Very problematic and troubling. New York State, we know that the only party that would still exist would be the Conservative Party. We know the governor got this commission in charge. He wanted to eliminate the Working Families Party, and he sees problems along the lines of this new wrinkle that he's putting in there. When he lost the IDC, that was his creation, he lost that. He's trying to find a new way to keep himself in power by empowering the Conservative Party in New York State, eliminating the Working Families Party. We think it's just, political hackery. And, we know right now in this great country, we're having this major problem with the president, with the influence in that, and him being doing things for political reasons. And we hate to see the governor go down that same path and get this commission and so forth just to go after his political opponents of Working Families Party. And we're pleased to say, keep fusion voting out of this conversation. It's constitutionally protected. We have already had 2 times that have been, lawsuits and so forth that we've won to keep it. That's constitutionally protected. Fusion voting is. So please pass fair elections and stay out of the fusion voting. Let minor parties, let people have a voice in New York State. We know minor parties give people a voice. The more choices they have, the better off they are. If you get back to the 2-3 party system, it's just going to eliminate people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rowley. After Mr. Lorigo, I'll invite Councilman Tom Best from Hamburg to the stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ralph Lorigo. I am and have been the Erie County Conservative Chairman for 25 years. I'm also an attorney with 45 years worth of experience. So what I want to make to you today is 2 legal points. First of all, in checking with the State Board of Elections, I have found that none of you have filed the necessary oath of office. Article 13, Section 1 of the New York State Constitution and the Public Officers Law require public officers to take and file an oath of office. Public Officers Law Section 10 requires every public officer to take and file the oath of office before he or she performs any official duty. Public Officers Law Section 2 defines what a public officer is. A state officer as every officer appointed by one or more state officers or the legislature to exercise their official function throughout the entire state. That describes each of you. Public Officers Law, Section 30 says, public officers provides that the office of public officer becomes vacant when public officers refuse or neglect to take and file his or her oath of office within 30 days of your appointment. Therefore, each of your positions have been vacated, and none of you have the authority to conduct this meeting. My second legal issue is the constitutionality. The people of New York vested legislative power in the Senate and Assembly. Only the legislature may pass new laws or modify existing laws. The Constitution is specific. No law shall be enacted except by bill, and no bill shall be passed or become law except by the assent of a majority of the members elected to each branch of the legislature. The legislature only may pass final bills. No bill may be amended after its final reading. Each of you serves by way of appointment. None of you are elected. Your commission shall issue recommendations to the governor and legislature regarding issues relating to public campaign financing by December 1st. Unless abrogated or modified by the legislature prior to December 22nd, the commission's recommendations become law and supersede inconsistent provisions of the election law. The commission, therefore, will make new law even if the legislature were to convene in a time frame where they're not scheduled to convene, even if one house were to vote one way and the other the other. You will be making law. You have no legal authority to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lariga. Councilman Best, and after Mr. Best, I'm going to invite Henry Kayukin. I guess that means I said it right. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, and thank you for the opportunity today to talk about my story. My name is Tom Best. I'm a councilman in the town of Hamburg, New York, and I was elected in 2015. I'm here to testify in support of small donor public financing and my strong opposition to fusion voting ban. I was elected in 2015 as a Democrat, but also had the support of the Working Families Party, the Conservative Party, and the Green Party. It was because of these minor party lines that my campaign was a success. The idea of banning fusion voting is just foolish. These minor party line endorsements allow candidates to be held accountable to all they serve, not just to one or two of the major parties. Besides, it's our constitutional right to be represented by more than one party. We've had the right to fusion voting in New York State since before the Civil War. If there was a ban on fusion voting, our political system, which I believe is already broken, it would be even further damaged. In our democracy, an unelected board should never be allowed to make such a drastic change to our voting process. I have experienced firsthand the political corruption associated with how our political process operates. This bad taste I've had even forced me to change my affiliation from Democrat to Republican in 2018. I did not change political parties due to a change in political beliefs, but rather my discontent with my own Democratic Party. The local Democratic Party leaders chose to run committee races against both me and numerous Democratic committee members with ties to organized labor that supported me. Why would they do this? It's because of my independence from their political directives, which benefit members of only one party. It is because of my support from the minor party lines, such as the Working Families Party line, many of which are members of organized labor. It was also because of my support by the Conservative Party line, which for the most part is the polar opposite of the Working Families line. You see, I have a strong belief in putting people before politics, quite different from those beliefs held by the political leaders of the two major parties. I mentioned that I switched my affiliation to Republican in 2018. Well, what I quickly found out was that the Republican Party leaders were no different than those of the Democratic Party. It's all about control, wanting to control the elected officials of their own party. This is exactly why fusion voting ban needs to be stopped. The Commission should not focus on irrelevant distractions like attempting to eliminate fusion voting. It is not the voting public seeking to ban fusion voting, but a political party trying to take advantage of having the greatest numbers in voter enrollment. A candidate having the ability to be endorsed by more than one party, including minor party lines, would limit some political pressures placed upon candidates by two major party bosses. Taking control from the two-party system and spreading it around, giving representation to all people of the political parties, giving everybody a fair shake. The very idea that a minor party like can play a role in ensuring a fair representation in an election is something that we should all desire. What I have to lastly say is that I would like to add that there's too many elections that are bought by candidates who have campaigns funded by big business donors with deep pockets. The playing field needs to be level. This inequality in fundraising results in an unfair election process in which those candidates without the ability to raise similar funds will typically not succeed. What is needed to level the playing field is permanent public financing campaign with a minimum of 6-to-1 matches and small donations. I urge the Commission to research the value of such a plan. It's time we work to fix the election process. It's the right thing to do, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman. Henry Kayukin, and then after Judith Hunter.
Hello, thank you for allowing me to speak. I am a concerned citizen. I support the Working Families Party, Fusion Voting, Libertarian Party, Green Party, and the Conservative Party. I'm speaking from the perspective of political science. Campaign finance reform, especially donor matching, is important for equitable and proportionally fair campaigns. But for truly fair elections, we need to be fighting for true majority mandates with instant runoff voting. The strategy shouldn't be whether you vote for a single politician or for whom best represents you, without worrying for the spoiler effect. Fusion voting is an attempt at more fair elections. It's an example of approval voting. Approval voting is shown to be more fair than first past the post, which is what we currently have. Approval voting is a simplified instant runoff voting. Getting rid of fusion voting won't make elections more fair. Passing instant runoff voting will. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kayukin.
Just a
Hunter.
question. Are you referring to ranked choice voting? Is that the other name? Is that what we're talking about, the other?
What?
The other form of voting you were talking about, is that ranked choice voting? Is that similar?
It's similar, yes.
Okay, approval. Okay, I just wanted to know.
Approval voting is just you vote with a check mark, whereas instant runoff voting, you put your assignment of your proportional acceptance of them.
Similar to
So
ranked
it's similar,
choice.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Judith Hunter, and then after we'll have Janet Massaro.
Hello, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Judith Hunter, and I am the chair of the Democratic Rural Conference of New York State. That the Rural Conference represents the 47 counties in New York out of a total of 62 that have populations of 250,000 or less. We desperately need public campaign financing in the rural counties. However, I'd like to caution against a one-size-fits-all approach. Our needs can be very, very different. For one thing, our incomes tend to be lower. If you look at 3 counties that neighbor Erie County, Allegheny, Cattaraugus, and Chautauqua, they all have median incomes of under $43,000. The median income in Nassau County is over $97,000. So there is simply less money available to raise. But there are also structural barriers, registration imbalances, and other factors that make it extremely hard for challengers to raise enough money to be competitive. And with all due respect to Assemblyman Goodell, who got beaten who won despite being outraised 5-1, it's just about getting to a competitive level. It's not about parity. The other thing I would like to mention that is very important in local races in the rural counties is a form of fusion voting that is not subject to the corruption that sometimes we see with the established minor parties. And that is the so-called party for a day, or small I independent lines, where a candidate and their supporters go out and petition and create a new line on the ballot simply for the purpose of that election. It creates no patronage, it creates no horse trading. It is simply a way to provide people another avenue to vote for a candidate they might support. But given the tribalism we so often see, it is crucial to be able to afford people the ability to vote for a candidate they might like on a party line they don't like. This is by avoiding a party line they don't like. This is something that in my own county since 2005 has mattered in every single election. And whatever happens with fusion voting, I hope that it can be flexible enough to allow this kind of system to continue. Thank you.
Thank you. Janet Massaro, and after Christy Nelson. Janet Massaro? Oh.
Good morning. My name is Janet Massaro. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Buffalo, Niagara. On behalf of the League, I thank the Commission for the opportunity to speak today about campaign finance reform and a small donor matching system for the state. For many years, the State League and local leagues, including my own Buffalo Niagara League, have worked tirelessly for campaign finance reform and the public financing for state elections. We all know the many benefits of a well-financed public financing system, and we also know that New York City's successful public financing program can serve as a model for the entire state. However, the League also knows that effective, independent, and adequate funded enforcement and much lower limits on all campaign contributions are fundamental to reforming our state's broken campaign finance laws. These reforms are not to be viewed as mere additions to implementing a public financing program, but as essential components of a state campaign finance system. Specifically, the League urges the following critical reforms. Number one, reduce contributions for all candidates, not just those participating in the public matching system. Limits for all candidates should be lowered to levels consistent with federal limits and lowered across the board to avoid discouraging candidates from participating in the public financing program. Number two, establish an independent campaign finance enforcement agency outside the Board of Elections to enforce campaign finance laws for all candidates. Experience to date with the Enforcement Division within the State Board of Elections has not been positive. Number three, provide a guaranteed stream of funding to ensure oversight is strong and the public's money is protected. Number four, reduce or eliminate entirely contribution by lobbyists and contractors doing business with the state. Number five, place limits on party housekeeping accounts at all levels. Currently, there are no limits. Housekeeping money has long been a major source of avoidance of the state's contribution limits. Finally, establish strict requirements for disclosure and reporting of contributions and expenditures like those in New York City. Small donor matching program without these reforms will discourage candidates from participating in the new system. It will allow the status quo in which organized interests and large contributions continue to have an unchecked influence in Albany. Such an outcome.
Thank you, Ms. Massaro. Next, we have Christy Nelson, and after Ms. Nelson, we have Ellen Kennedy. Would you like me to distribute the copies? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Christy Nelson, and I am a concerned citizen and a small business owner. We're often told every vote counts, but it certainly doesn't seem that way in most elections. the dollar seems to matter most. For those of us that have less of it, they feel the impact of the lack of influence in the outcome of those elections. As a result, individuals feel powerless, their interest in the political process wanes, and then we see low voter turnout. We need the public campaign financing program to empower citizens and residents of New York State and reinstate the public's trust in the election process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. Ellen Kennedy, and then Linda Hurley.
Good afternoon. My name is Ellen Kennedy, and I am speaking here today as a member of Citizen Action of New York and a registered voter in the Working Families Party. Having been a member of Citizen Action since the founding of the Western New York chapter in 1985, I have had numerous opportunities to express support for public financing of elections. Too many, one might say, since each time I gave testimony, I said, "Now is the time." In 2012, 2013, 2015, 2016, and I'll say it again in 2019. You have heard from citizens across the state that big money must be taken out of politics. Taxpayers are fed up with public dollars being used to reward generous campaign contributors with special treatment, such as tax breaks and subsidies. And we know that many pieces of legislation which would benefit working families do not pass because of the influence of money on lawmakers. Public financing of elections will allow dedicated citizens to run solid campaigns for office and will change the election season to one of issue debate rather than constant fundraising. This commission is also addressing fusion voting, although many of us believe that that is inappropriate, as fusion voting is protected in the New York State Constitution. I'm curious, are there any members of this commission who do not believe fusion is constitutionally protected? In no way does fusion voting lead to corruption or confusion among voters. Quite the opposite, in fact. Members of both political parties, the major ones, Democrats and Republicans, represent a range of political beliefs. There are conservative Democrats and there are liberal Republicans. A minority party endorsement, especially from the Working Families Party, which has a serious interview process, provides a voter with important information which helps determine whether the candidate supports liberal or conservative platforms. For example, this year, along with other WFP members in Western New York, I participated in in-person interviews with over 100 candidates seeking our endorsement. These candidates also had completed a 16-page questionnaire that laid out the major issues important to the party. Endorsement decisions were then made based on candidates' alignment with our values and issues. Leave fusion voting alone. And to repeat myself, now is the time for public financing of elections. Thank you.
Thank you. Linda Hurley is next. Just letting you know that we'll be taking a break in about 7 minutes. So I'll probably call 2 more people, and then we'll finish the list after we get back. It'll be a short break.
I'd also like to thank the Commission for your work and for listening to us. As a school board trustee in my town, I am always excited when we get comments from the community, so I hope this commission is excited and thinks it's great also. My name is Linda Hurley. I'm one of 20 plaintiffs in action to protect a well-established right, fusion voting. I've been a Working Family Party voter since 2015. The principle that electors can vote for their party's convention or committee-endorsed candidate, even if another party has also selected that candidate, is at stake. This commission was charged in the current budget statute with, among other things, suggesting laws and rules relating to multiple party candidate nominations and/or designations, i.e. fusion, candidacy, and voting. They have the force of law in these rules, and the controlling appellate case law makes clear that only the legislature can enact or amend laws, and even the legislature cannot enact laws that disenfranchise voters. Possibly the drafters of the statute weren't aware of these earlier constitutional challenges and decisions on fusion candidacy and voting. The first challenge occurred over 100 years ago. Since that controlling New York appellate decision in Ray Callahan, the constitutional basis of electoral fairness and consistency has been upheld in 2 other appellate court cases in 1911 and 1973. Those decisions are clear and the fact patterns similar in the attempted modification of the election law. The constitutional basis of the right of an independent body to nominate any qualified person as candidate for office is stated in Callahan. The relevant majority opinion states the provisions of the New York State election law at issue forbidding a committee or party or independent body authorized to make nominations or fill vacancies to nominate a candidate of another party or independent body for the same office are plainly invalid and unconstitutional. If the legislature does grant a convention or committee or body the right, it cannot limit the rights of such convention or body to nominate its candidate any person who is qualified for the office. And finally, a committee can more readily make fusion and combinations than conventions. If this is the case, what power is there to forbid such fusions and combinations? Increased access to voting for the people represented by the electors is the source of all power and a positive result for the state, democracy, and the lives of the people. Any effort to go back and relitigate the settled law is a waste of valuable time and resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Huttner, and then we'll conclude with Rebecca Biluski. Biluski, okay. And we'll take about a half hour. We're coming back after the 30 minutes. We're not concluded for the day. We're just taking a short break, and then we're coming back and hearing rest of testimony.
Good afternoon. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. My name is Michael Huttner, a citizen and recently retired educator and president of a local teachers union. So I just wanted to address the importance we see for fusion voting primarily. I'm here today to express my support for fusion voting. Our democracy is not only strengthened when voting rights and access are increased, but equally as important is our ability to influence our candidates and elected officials. Fusion voting allows us to do this. As past president of a local teachers union, I witnessed this firsthand. Specifically, commission members may remember when New York State began its effort to secure federal funds for a race to the top. During this long evolution of disastrous education policy, politicians influenced many of the aspects. Leading to, among many particular things, was the annual Professional Performance Review, APPR. Educators from around the state hated the particulars of this law. The onerous details were seen by educators as an attack by them or on them personally and professionally. Specifically, teachers saw the governor as a primary reason for such an attack. As the governor's reelection rolled out, it was impossible for my members to support this governor who had so clearly targeted them and their union. The members of my local deeply resented the government's attack, yet aware that things could also be much worse. They did not want to abstain from voting or throw their vote away. They wanted to send a message. They wanted to influence the candidate whom they agreed with on other issues. Fusion voting gave us that ability by allowing us to vote on the working family party's line versus the Democratic line. We need fusion voting to help us retain our voice and to influence. Fusion voting gives us that voice and allows us to send a message. It allows us to remind our candidates that their positions matter, and candidates must be responsive to their constituents. I implore you to retain fusion voting in New York State. Thank you.
Thank you. Rebecca?
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Belewski. I am the chair of the Town of Clarence Democratic Committee. I am here to ask for an end to fusion voting in New York State. Although minor parties may have began with the promise of ideals and beliefs separate from the two major political parties, and some remain that way, it has been my experience in politics that some minor parties have lost their original goals. Through fusion, some minor parties are used for their guaranteed ballot lines, which translate into more total votes for the candidate appearing on those lines. Some minor parties use this power to exert influence, not necessarily for the greater good or to promote their beliefs and ideals, but rather to benefit those candidates and electeds who are willing to trade principles for political gain. Some chairmen of these minor parties and their extensions arguably wield more power than any chair of a major party. These chairmen can withhold endorsements and therefore ballot lines because a candidate will not, quote, play ball with what the chairman wants, often at time for his own or her own financial gain. On behalf of the voters and the future of our state, I humbly ask that this commission ban fusion voting. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for being patient with us. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll return here and finish the names on the list. Thank you.